In this lesson, we will look specifically at developing and using expectations and rules within our classrooms. For Lesson 1, the learning target is, I can create classroom expectations and rules to promote positive behavior. There are 5 universal strategies for classroom management. Classroom rules that are posted, classroom schedule that is posted, individual student schedules available, structured classroom space, procedures and routines. Many of these strategies, classroom schedules, individual student schedules, structured classroom space and routines, have been covered in previous Splash modules. In the Visual Supports module, you learned about individual student schedules, establishing routines, and the importance of the structured classroom space. In Working with Paraprofessionals module, you learned the importance of master classroom schedules along with adult schedules. Although we will not review all of these concepts in this module, each are important ones for classroom management. It is also important that all parties, students, and adults know each of these concepts well to ensure consistency for a smooth running classroom. Therefore, you are encouraged to refer to the modules on visual supports and working with paraprofessionals for more extensive information on these topics. Please take a moment to complete activity number 1, Self-Assessment on Teaching Classroom Expectations and Rules. The link to activity number 1 can be found below the slide. Once you have completed the self-assessment, place the assessment to the side. We will come back to this form later in the lesson. You may pause the video now to complete your self-assessment. Why focus on classroom rules? Research has demonstrated that classroom rules increases student engagement with instructional tasks. It is important to make sure that the rules are established and taught at the very beginning of the school year and enforced consistently throughout the year. Students need to know what to expect right from the beginning. Expectations and rules are not the same thing. Expectations are general acceptable behaviors or outcomes, or what we want to see happen, and may be more broad and abstract. Rules are the specific criteria for meeting the expectations. Rules define acceptable behavior. Expectations and rules provide guidelines for students to monitor their own behavior or self-regulate. Rules are a way to remind and motivate students to meet specific standards. Tip: for students with significant disabilities, the rules need to be very specific and concrete. They may also need more external motivators to encourage them to follow the rules. It is especially important the rules are enforced consistently for these students to learn and apply the rules. Stated another way, expectations are broadly stated, apply to all people in all settings, and describe general ways that people behave. Rules, on the other hand, are specific and concrete, observable and measurable, and may be limited to a specific setting and clarify behaviors for specific settings. It's important to understand the difference between expectations and rules so they can be clearly taught to the students. In this graphic, the expectation is to be respectful. The rule to demonstrate respect to others, teacher and peers, is to raise your hand. This is just one way that students demonstrate respect and may be limited to the specific classroom activities. In addition, students need to understand the rationale of why the rule is important. In the PBIS system, it is important that students generate the rationale for these behaviors when teaching the expectations or rules. Tip: for students with significant disabilities, this may be hampered for some students who do not have an efficient mode of communication. Remember to keep it concrete as possible and to use visual supports as much as you can. For students with VOCA, their device may need to be pre-programmed to provide choices for them to participate in the discussion to the extent possible. Expectations may include the following: respect, responsibility, and excellence. These are all very broad concepts that are important to most people in most settings. These expectations are very abstract and may be difficult for students with significant disabilities to understand and demonstrate. The following rules are specific, observable, measurable, and may apply to specific situations or settings. Keep hands, feet, and objects to yourself. Arrive on time with all necessary materials. Stay on task during all work times. Tip: for students with significant disabilities, you may want to include some visual supports as well to make the rules even more concrete for them. Your rules should provide objective descriptions of the specific behaviors you expect from students and pre-inform them that certain behaviors are not acceptable. Remember the explicit teaching sequence: I do, we do, you do. Classroom rules need to be observable. Avoid vague rules. An example: be good when possible. If it is vague, you have to teach it clearly and explicitly with lots of examples and non-examples. Don't confuse rules with expectations. In other words, try your best. Remember that rules have natural consequences, whereas expectations are lifelong attitudes and behaviors that we don't have consequences. Measurable. The rules should be measurable and include action words: raise, wait, ask, arrive, stay. Positive. The rule should be stated as to what you want to happen, not what you don't want. Avoid words like don't and stop. Only 5 or less. Keep it to 5 or less rules. Let the characteristics of your student be your guide. If you have a lot of students with lower level skills, then maybe only 3 rules. No questions. Do not face rules as questions. Rules need to be statements. Who will have input into the rules? The students? The adults? Both students and adults? Tips. In developing rules, you must decide on the interfering behaviors that you think are most likely to occur. This needs to be done in regard to age appropriateness and developmental level of your students. Keep language simple and to the point. Avoid extra words. Include visual supports. When teaching, emphasize what you want the student to do and include video examples along with role playing whenever possible. This chart provides a good visual as to what each of the characteristics of a good rule means, with examples and non-examples for you to refer to as you develop your classroom rules. Take a moment and read about each characteristic. Tip. Many of the students with significant disabilities may not understand the concept of personal space like younger children. This concept may need to be explicitly taught using our gradual release procedures discussed in the introduction of this module. 3 examples of rules are provided for you here. Look at each one and review each according to the characteristics that we have discussed. Do they have all the characteristics? Are they observable, measurable, positive, only 5 or less, no questions? Are there any rules that need to be changed? If so, how would you fix it? Tip. Start with verbs. Use as few words as possible, and visual supports should help clarify, not be a distraction. A link to Activity 2 is located below the slide. The slide is a list of non-examples of expectations or rules. Many of these may be an expectation. Some may be an inappropriate rule. Sort the statements on the slide onto the chart in Activity 2 as either an expectation or a rule. For those deemed as an inappropriate rule, pick 2 to rephrase to include all the characteristics of a rule that we discussed earlier. Pause the video now to complete Activity number 2. Refer to Activity 1 that was completed at Slide 4. Review your self-assessment on teaching classroom expectations and rules. Number 1. Select one item that you feel is important to your classroom management success. Write a rule using the characteristics of an effective rule. 2. Develop strategies to teach it to your students. Pause the video now to complete this activity. When teaching the rules, it is important to practice and model the rules routinely. This will be very important at the start of the year and after long breaks. Include all of these practices to ensure that your students understand each rule in particular. Read the posted rule. Discuss and/or role-play the rule. Videos can be very helpful in providing the students with concrete examples. Many teachers find videos that demonstrate the rule. For example, if the rule is to raise your hand before talking, find a YouTube video where students raise their hands before sharing. Have the students practice. Next, explain what will happen if the rule is followed. Explain what will happen if the rule is not followed. Click on the link in the slide to play the video. As you watch the video, think about the following questions. What were the rules depicted in this video? There are 6. Did the rules include each of the characteristics of an effective rule? Was it observable, measurable, positive, only 5 or less, no questions?